According to the American Psychological Association's article titled Grieve, Coping with the Loss of Your Loved One, research shows that most people can recover from loss on their own through the passage of time if they have social support and health habits. Some of those health habits we'll go over in me and my guests, and we're going to talk about that. This is one of those episodes, guys. It's going to be a little more serious than some of the others, just simply because I feel like looking back over this season, I didn't want to end it with mentioning so much devastation and different things that we've been facing through this pandemic time without devoting at least one episode to loss of all kinds, whether that's an unexpected health change or grieving the loss of someone or something that was long-term or what you were expecting to be long-term in your life. And so I'm actually going to welcome a guest here to kind of talk about those things, and also a guest that devotes majority of his podcast to these exact topics. Michael Hurst is the creator and host of One More Thing Before You Go podcast. If I can sum this podcast up, I would say it talks about basically the journey of life. It covers topics of death, mental illness, grief, and health issues, and so much more. So I'm actually going to welcome him into this conversation, and hopefully by the end of this, you guys leave with something you can really, really use during this time. All right, Michael, you ready to have a brief discussion with me?
I absolutely am. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, man, what got you started with One More Thing Before You Go? What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I have an interesting journey. I'm a retired police sergeant, and I was injured in the line of duty. So not only did I, during my career, understand loss of many types in dealing with different calls that I had gone to, whether it be the unexpected loss of somebody or the unattended deaths or the traffic accidents or the homicides or suicide, it always had stuck with me. And during that time period that was on the job, I I get emotional when I talk to some of this because some of it comes back to me. I had the honor of being with people who weren't able to say what they wanted to say before somebody was gone, before they passed. So, and the honor of being able to pass that message on. So that kind of resonated with me that everybody has one more thing that they really should say. Or one more thing, if you haven't said it yet, you need to really open your heart, your eyes, and your ears and say it, because you never know what's going to happen in life.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's a hard pill to swallow too once someone's gone. All of the things that are unsaid, a lot of times when people experience a loss, they think about the things that went unsaid. And that's the most difficult part for some people to get through because, the tragedy in that is that the other party is gone. And so this is such a permanent thing that occurs in life that it's just like you're forced to accept what you can't change, right?
Absolutely.
And
You know,
it's
and,
difficult.
and it's interesting because hopefully, in just a little bit here, I've got some opportunity for people who have been suffering through this or have suffered loss and didn't get to say what they wanted to say. I might have some tips for you in order for them to achieve that in some form.
Yeah. And see, guys, I opened this up, and maybe some of these tips will fall in line with what you're getting ready to offer, Michael. Feel free to add to them. I opened this episode up with that article because although it's been reproduced, I think as early as this year, like in January, it was originally written in 2011. So it's been adapted. But I feel like it still holds a lot of truth to some of the practical applications people can get through grief. As someone who struggled with that myself, I know that I've definitely did a number of these things on this list. So I'm going to go over it and see what you think about this. So the first thing that they mentioned was talking about, the death of your loved one, how avoidance can lead to isolation and actually disrupt the healing process with support systems. That's something that a lot of people, I think, juggle with, understanding that you can't ignore the fact that this person is not here, but we default to avoidance, even if that's just something that we naturally do or we're encouraged to do by people that we're around. What do you think about that, Michael?
No, I agree. Conversation is a very important aspect of healing throughout your whole mind, body, and soul.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation is part of that. Is part of that opening the door to healing. So it gives you an opportunity to not only talk about it, but you can reflect on the good things as well. Most people, when somebody passes away, they remember, or they try to remember the good things that have happened. So if you can keep the positivity in regard to what you remember from that person or that animal, or in whatever aspect, because loss can also entail other things. You can lose something within your lifetime, with your body part, or with a companion or something like that. It all pertains to the same thing. Conversation is key to starting the process.
Yeah. And then like the second thing they mentioned was accepting your feelings. I definitely struggle with this in the beginning of, just giving yourself permission to feel whatever that is. If it's a jovial feeling, a lot of people feel guilty about being happy or laughing or rejoicing in a memory, when there's so much devastation in that grieving component around you. But allowing yourself to process the up and down. In this article, I think is one of very few that I've seen mention exhaustion. And you spend a little bit of time talking about how people experience exhaustion on a whole new level when there's a grief.
It's interesting. The aspect of losing someone or a part of yourself, um, you go through stages of grief, and those stages of grief, it can be exhausting. The whole process of it, whether or not you're kind of constantly blaming yourself for not being able to say what you wanted to say, or to move forward, or because you thought you could have helped in some way that to prevent whatever took place or happened. It weighs upon your soul. It weighs upon your heart, and exhaustion is not a good thing. And if I can point out, and I know this is along that same line, if you are grieving for the loss of anyone or somebody close to you, a family member, a friend, a spouse, a brother, sister, uncle, even a pet, you grieve in your own time. There's no set time limit for grief. You can take 5 days, 1 day, 10 days. You can grieve in a year. You just can't let that grief overtake your daily life. You can still grieve and understand and learn what your process is and help overcome that process or revisit that grief at different times in your life. But understand that in doing so, it doesn't detract the fact that you own that grief. It's yours. It belongs to you.
Yeah, that's key too. I mean, because like I was saying earlier, it's like a lot of people try to rush you to the end, tell you be strong, soldier through it, do X, Y, and Z, or even some people look down on others who take a while. In my our household, we definitely have grieved for years, so I would not recommend that, but it does hit differently. But to add to that, I mean, it also depends on how much experience you have with losing things, right? So the time that I've experienced like a very close grief, that was the very first time I'd experienced it. So it took me probably longer than most to get through it because I had very limited experience with that. Everyone I had lost prior to my grandmother were, kind of estranged or at least distance enough to where I didn't feel the impact of it as much. And then the one person that was closest to me was actually a neighbor and someone I was under like a lot throughout my childhood. But I was so young that I didn't recognize what, true death was until a much later age.
Yeah, and that's important to remember as well. Death is inevitable, unfortunately. Maybe one day they'll come up with a new technique where it might not be,
Yeah.
but it's part of life. Death is part of life, and that's why we talk about it on my podcast as well. It it becomes part of the process of life. I lost my father when I won't tell you how old I am, but we'll stretch it a little. I lost my father when I was 17 years old. Technically 15 because my parents had divorced and my uncle had taken him back to Pennsylvania. So I technically lost him since I was 15 years old. Didn't know he was sick. He had cancer and he had cirrhosis of the liver. So he passed away, and I got that news from a phone call. When I got that news from the phone call, because I hadn't had much contact with him over a couple of years, that didn't really affect me immediately. It took me a little while, but once I got reminders about something, I met a reporter that my father used to work with a couple of years after he had passed. Then all of a sudden, I was hit with grief.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, I remembered, oh, yeah, this was what my dad was like. Oh, yeah, I missed that. And I went through a grieving process at that time. I kind of worked through that. And, I still occasionally go back to that little grief period, which is not wrong, because
Right.
grief also helps us to remember the positive things about people.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy how it works. I mean, I could spend a little time on that myself, just with what I was saying about, the person that I'd lost much earlier in life, but it didn't dawn on me exactly what that meant until I lost my grandmother, and that's a significant gap. I lost that person in the 4th grade, and I didn't lose my grandmother until my senior year of high school. So, but now, I mean, it's just a matter of processing all of these emotions.
Exactly.
And this article, the third thing that they mentioned was like a practical application of getting through this was taking care of yourself and your family. Eating right, checking on people. They say, being of service to someone else helps a lot more when you're able, especially if they've lost someone, when you're able to help someone, it kind of restores you too. And then the fourth thing was reach out and help others dealing with loss. Like I just said, the fifth one was remember and celebrate the lives of your loved ones. And then they also, by the end of that, recommended, seeing a psychologist, taking grief counseling if it's to the point where you can't get through your days, all of those things are just not working. And that's totally fine. I'm not here to stigmatize that at all because there's no stigma behind that. That's a natural thing. And I think we need to normalize grief counseling.
Oh, absolutely. And that goes back to the conversation aspect of it. You got to be able to talk about it, and helping other people, obviously, through other things also takes your mind in a different direction. It helps you to heal because you are, like you said, you are helping other people and you're putting forth to them the aspect of, well, when you think about some of the religions out there that celebrate death, that the wake, the Irish, they do a wake. They celebrate the life of the person before they passed. That kind of follows through even with that, with the last steps that you had just spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
They're all there together. They're all there to talk about it. They're all there to laugh about it. They're all there to cry about it, all helping each other do the same thing until they all understand the loss is inevitable, but the loss can be positive.
Yeah. And you know what? I wanted to open this podcast. It was important to me to open this podcast with that article because when I started listening to your podcast, I like to go back and listen from the very beginning and just like binge listen. And then it becomes like a part of my week when I'm new to a podcast. I really take the time to listen episode by episode. And I feel like you were the perfect person to talk about this because one of the first ones I listened to was, I think you titled it Losing Someone Close to You, and it was your daughter on there sharing how she had witnessed so much death, unexpected losses. Um, that stuck out to me because it's one thing that she mentioned in there was like when you know someone's near death and you get that kind of prep about it, prep for it. There's no way of prepping for death, but understanding that it's possible, your mind already begins to process the what if
Yes.
versus if someone dies suddenly and you don't get I guess that rest of expectancy. I'd love to ask you, well, I'm going to ask you about, do you have experience with prepping for a death? Or would you say you've mostly dealt with just instant, unexpected death?
I'm going to say fortunately and unfortunately. Fortunately, I've had experience with prepping for death. I've had numerous family members that have passed on. My stepfather died of cancer. My grandmother died of cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. I've had 2 uncles and an aunt that died of cancer, and I was there, watched the process. understood the process from that point, watched them being taken care of, watched them going through chemo, watched them losing that battle. So during that time period, it did indoctrinate me into that. Caitlin, my daughter that was in that particular episode, she also had been witness. I brought her into see what I mean, he was her step grandfather, but he was Pop, he was grandpa. And that's who she knew all of her life as grandpa. Because blood does not define family. And the aspect of knowing that he died of cancer and watching that process, it helped Caitlin to understand how to prep for somebody to pass on. So I've unfortunately and fortunately, I was able to witness that on numerous occasions.
Yeah.
But and on the other hand, I've also had unexpected death. That even though that I had dealt with death in some form or another throughout my career in law enforcement, I had unexpected death as well. I've had 3 of my colleagues die, 2 of them due to suicide, PTSD, that were on the job, and another one that was involved in a catastrophic traffic accident. So I had to learn myself how to kind of understand what you're going through with unexpected loss, because I never expected that to happen to those individuals as well. So I've got experience on both sides of it, actually.
Yeah. Would you say that line of duty allowed you to kind of grow immune to death?
It did, actually. Unfortunately, it kind of the times that I have lost family members, I was working on the job, and in that particular time period, when most of my family were grieving over the death, I was the one making phone calls because I was the only one that. And this sounds kind of cold, so please understand it in no means, because I love my family, but I was the only one that wasn't crying or consoling. They needed somebody to step forward. Well, I was used to doing that in that time period, so I had to suppress everything and then move forward so that we could get things accomplished. Of the 2 friends that I lost to suicide, I have to keep myself from getting a little emotional. Both of these individuals I have known and had known for 30 years. Both of them have been in public service. Richie, the guy that was killed in a catastrophic traffic accident, I'd worked with him as well. He was on my team. I was his sergeant. One of the other guys, I was his sergeant. And those were completely unexpected for me. So I went through periods of unique grief because I hadn't had to go through that before. With my father, we had been estranged for a few years, so the buffer was there, if that makes sense. There was kind of a buffer. I got a phone call. I didn't get a knock on the door, didn't get somebody standing there. I hadn't seen my dad. I just had coffee with him the other day or had breakfast with him, yesterday. It had been something where I hadn't seen him for a couple of years anyway prior to that. So within that regard, I had a buffer. I have to say this carefully. People who work in emergency services, police officers, firefighters, EMTs, you create kind of a wall of protection around you because if whether or not you're delivering a message, whether or not you are having to tell loved ones that somebody's not coming home, or if you work on somebody and you can't bring them back, which has happened numerous occasions, then you have to go tell somebody I tried. Mm-hmm. Still sticks with me.
Right.
Okay. So you build up a wall and you have to put the emotion and push it down because you have a job to do. That's why you see a lot of cops that end up either drinking or, dying at an early age and things like this, because same thing with the EMTs and firefighters, because they're with that all the time. And when you see it all the time, you have to suppress it and suppress it and suppress it. And then once you're gone and out of there, sometimes you don't always have the opportunity to kind of let it go. So that's where meditation comes in. That's where mind, body, soul comes in. That's where you have to learn to have a conversation, and you have to be willing to talk and talk about it, because talking about it is cathartic. It allows you to release things like that. And that, not just from somebody on the job, but somebody that has dealt with loss in any form. Conversation allows you to open the doors to healing, because you can say how you felt, what you felt, why you felt, why you're happy, why you're sad, why you're angry. You have the opportunity to do all this. So in those times that I was on the job and my family members passed away, knowing that they had cancer, or I want to say 98% of them had cancer. My mother passed away with a heart attack. Everybody prior to that, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, all died of cancer of some form or another. So I stay away from cancer.
Hey, I get it. Trust me. There's a built-up fear of it. We've lost one family member to cancer in my family, and then my grandmother passed of a heart attack. So those two things, when I hear it, I'm just immediately exercising, trying to eat right. Man, I garden, I do everything, because naturally there is a fear there that the same thing could happen to you, especially if it runs in your family. But it is interesting to see how people can experience a loss without it being necessarily death. When you talk about you and your father's relationship, and how when he passed, it was almost like a buffer for you, because he wasn't just there day in, day out. That's a different type of loss that people need to spend time coping with as well. The loss of a parent, even though it's not through death. Because that can give you the same effects as some of the things we're talking about.
Absolutely, because you don't get closure.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't get closure. You don't get to say goodbye. You don't get to say what you wanted to say. If I had known, I would have been able to say what I wanted to say, and it would have helped me to get closure. It took me 40, now I'm giving away part of my age. It took me 45 years to get some kind of a closure in regard to that. And that was because I finally went and talked to somebody. Because without sounding bravado, most cops, most firemen, most EMTs, they don't go talk to somebody. They don't talk to a psychologist. They now have psychiatrists and psychologists who are specific to emergency services. Cops, they have specific people to go talk to now. They have psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth that understand what a cop goes through, understands what an EMT goes through, understands what a firefighter goes through. Where most normal psychologists, psychiatrists, you can go in and say, well, today I went in, I don't know how explicit I can be on this program. Today I went into somebody, got a phone call because they hadn't heard from someone, such and such for a couple of weeks. And it's Christmas time. It's literally Christmas Day. And this individual, we haven't heard from him because he didn't bring any gifts over to the house, and normally he does. Can you go check on him? So we go to check on him, and then we find out that he passed 2 weeks prior. And nobody checked on him for 2 weeks to find out if he was okay. So there's a lot of anger with that. There's a lot of reason. I don't know this person. I didn't know this person, for example, but I still felt empathy for this person and compassion for this person and understanding for this person, that nobody thought about him for 2 weeks until he didn't show up with Christmas gifts. So, you can't talk to people like that, because then they get the feeling that you're insensitive or it's none of your business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't do anything until I finally talked to somebody that was related to this field, and I was able to start talking about things and get things out. And not only did I talk about all the stuff that went on during my job, I got to talk about losing my parents, both of them, and getting the phone call instead of being there when it took place. I got to talk about all my relatives that I lost with there's 8 of them that I lost to cancer. And I got to talk about my 3 friends that I lost to a tragic suicide and an accident. it enabled me to kind of release some of that and get some closure on a lot of that. So it goes back to the first thing we talked about at the beginning. You got to open a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, that's so true.
Whether you're prepared or whether you're not prepared, because even when you think you're prepared, even when you build up a tolerance, it still affects you deep, and it still affects you inside. And if you hold it in and if you suppress it, then it just does nothing but eat away at you on the inside, which isn't a good thing.
Yeah, I know some of those things are extremely hard for you to talk about. So I appreciate you for just being so open to share that with us. Oh man. But yeah, and another thing that you mentioned was, alternative healing methods like the meditation. Guys, this could be anything. It's unguided meditation with you just taking deep breaths, or guided meditations. I know I resort to a common app called Calm. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, Michael, but yeah, I love it because they have both on there. And I think they have one specifically for grief, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe they do, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so doing things like that, guys, is going to really be a practical way of being more intentional about seeing what's next for you. Because grief has a way of stopping you, preventing you from even feeling like going on sometimes. It's, very severe. But I wanted to also ask you about another episode that was very intriguing to me, was the message from the other side with the mediums. And I was like, because that's a iffy thing. Some people believe, some people don't. I said somewhere in between. What I will say, I provide this specific belief of mine when it comes to mediums. I think that they are very real, but not everyone who's claiming to be one is real.
I agree with that.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah. And would you say that it's time sensitive too? Like when you contact them, if it's an earlier, if you just experienced this death, you may have a stronger connection with that. For that medium to connect with that person versus if you wait at a later time.
What I have learned, because I'm not a medium myself. At times I wish I was. I think it'd be kind of cool. What I have learned in my conversations, and I vet my individuals that come on to my program. So if somebody comes on and I do not feel that they are worthy of coming on the program with something that is valid or something that at least contributes to something in a very positive way, then they don't come on my program. So the mediums that I do have on there have been vetted, and I've been able to substantiate a good portion of what they have said. And actually, they're giving me messages after the program. So that'll answer part of your question. I believe that, from what I've learned, basically, when somebody just pass on, when they just pass, the way I understand it is that they are in a holding pattern, so to speak, because a lot of times their soul, their conscious doesn't quite understand that they're gone yet. So it's difficult for them to talk right after they left. So you have to give it a little bit of time. Once you go through a little bit of time when they can settle in and really understand what they've been through and what the transition that they took place, then it's okay to kind of reach out. Wow. And you can do that in several different reasons or several different ways. Again, not a medium, not a psychic, but this is what I've learned. And it has worked for us. We just lost my wife's father to dementia in 2018. We took care of him before he passed, and he was in the home when he passed. So it had been a little while, and one of the psychics that I had, the mediums that I had interviewed, just as an example, one of them that I had spoken with didn't get anything within about a month after David had passed. I did another interview with Debbie, and this was probably 6 months later. And Debbie starts going, okay, I need to talk to Diane. That's my wife. Diane was in the other room. I said, why? And she started giving me all this information and describing David, her father, to a T.
Wow.
I mean, she just had it down. Yeah, it's stuff that there is absolutely, she's from Canada. We don't know each other. We hadn't had a conversation prior to her coming on the show, other than vetting her in the beginning. She knew nothing. And I'm a cop, okay? I don't tell anybody anything.
You
So
enter with a level of suspicion until proven otherwise.
exactly. So I hadn't told her anything about this, and she starts describing. I said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute." And this was at the end of the program, by the way, not during the program. She waited to the end of the program. She says, "I got to tell you this." And she starts talking about David, and she starts describing this guy. And I'm going, "I know who that is. Just a minute." And I went and got my wife, and I brought her in, and I said, "Here's Diane." And she starts telling Diane things from her that her father's telling her that only Diane would know. Now, Debbie hadn't met Diane. And this was after the program ended. So there was no benefit for her to do this, to
Right.
do this after the program. There's no benefit for her. If she would have done it during the program, you could say, well, you're just being a show off. You're just trying to drum up business. But when the tape stopped rolling and we stopped recording, this was after. And we talked for her for like 30 minutes, and she delivered all kinds of messages, which was amazing in that regard. But it took 6 months.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as I told you, my father died in 1977. So what is that, 40?
You don't want to age yourself. Just
We'll
you'd
say
still be young. Look, you'd
over
still be
40
young.
decades.
Okay. Yeah.
I do not look my age.
Hey, so you need to flaunt that age around then. I'll always help you as long as you don't look it. Listen.
I am over 60 years old.
You don't look it at all.
Thank you. I still have my hair, and it's still dark, except for this little white stuff on my face that keeps showing up. So I had lost my father, as I told you, for over 40 years ago, 45 years ago. I hadn't heard much of him. And one of the other mediums that I had spoken with waited until the program was over. And after I stopped recording, I cut the line and I said, we're still face to face. And I said, I want to thank you very much. I really appreciate everything that you did. And, I look forward to maybe in the future having another conversation. She said, but before we do that, I have to tell you this. She interrupted me. And I said, okay. And she said, I'm going to get emotional again. She literally told me about my father that she would have no knowledge whatsoever about him because she didn't know when he died, where he died. We didn't talk about it in the program. Okay. She told me what he died of. She said something to do with his throat and something to do with his this area. And you can't see me here, but she pointing down here. And I said he died of esophageal cancer and of cirrhosis of the liver. And she said, well, he wants to let you know that he's proud of you. And he wants to let you know that he appreciates the fact that you're, and she told me things that there was absolutely no way she would have known that my father as I was a child, had told me that he always wanted me to be a writer. He always wanted me to create this. There is no way she would have known this whatsoever. So she probably talked for probably a good 30 minutes. And she said how, and again, she would not know this. She talked about and described my oldest daughter. And she described my youngest daughter. And she said, one lives on the East Coast, one lives on the West Coast. And she said, your father is proud of his grandkids. Okay. This is stuff that absolutely she would not know. My Facebook is a private Facebook. So unless you are my friend, unless I've invited you in, you cannot see anything other than my public profile on Facebook. That's it. My Twitter's private. My Instagram is private. So there's no way she could have found any of this out. She would have known what my kids look like. She would have known that one lives on the East Coast, one lives on the West Coast. And my father, how he died and when he died. So that's 45 years later. So what I was told was that on the other side, time is different than it is here. To them, 40 years can be an hour.
Yeah.
To them. That's what I've been told. And that's how I understood it. And the reason I gave you those two examples is because that's what I've been told. So if you're looking for an opportunity to listen and open your eyes, my daughter said it in the first episode. And others have said it as I've interviewed them throughout the podcast. Everybody, if they're on the other side and if they're available, and you have to open your heart, open your eyes, open your ears, you can actually hear the signs. My daughter, I'm sure you heard in the episode where she talked
Yeah.
about the sirens, and then
Mm-hmm.
she's got a thing with hummingbirds. Whenever she sees a hummingbird, that's Ryan talking to her, because a hummingbird just shows up out of nowhere.
Right.
Okay, you listen for it, you can see it. My wife gets feathers. The feathers that she finds just out of the blue, she'll find a feather. Yes, birds fly around. Yes, birds lose their feathers. But when she's asking for help from somebody like her parent, her father who's passed away, like she's thinking about him, a feather gets dropped someplace.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you just have to open your heart, open your eyes, and just kind of be open to listening.
Yep. Yeah, that was something that stuck out to me in that episode, was the way they're validating their appearance in our world, because now it's strange to us because we're in the physical, right? But when you hit the spiritual realm of things, there is no barriers, I believe anyway. I feel like, a lot of the things that we have to face as barriers, like, okay, something as simple as your eyesight, right? I tell people this is the reason why I will die a believer, because our eyesight fails us every day. Even the ones who feel like they can see things perfectly fine, there's still a portion of everyone that cannot see all things. And this has been scientifically proven. And
Yep.
so if that is the case, that means you can't rely on seeing is believing, because some part of you is not seeing even the world in which you're living in.
Yes.
If you could see
Absolutely.
it'd probably freak you out, all the things that you've lived around and haven't seen. Even digitally, all of these ones and zeros that are converting from sound waves and things of that nature just to, enter an interface to even reproduce sound. Like, it's a lot that goes into it. But what I will say with my experience with a medium, I was a skeptic like you. I was like, man, I really didn't believe in them then. This was the first year that my grandmother passed. We actually reached out to one many months later. And that is what changed my opinion about them, because this lady was, again, validating things. We didn't tell her anything, like nothing. The first thing she opened the session up with was saying that my grandmother was waving her arms, and it like brought us to tears, because my grandmother was bedridden and suffered heart attacks and strokes when she was here, and so eventually she got to a point in her last year where a PIC line exploded in her arm, and so it like nearly tripled in size, and she was no longer able to raise that arm. And so even to keep it clean and sterilize it, we would have to have one person lifting it up and the other person bandaging it, cleaning it. It was a
Wow.
lot of us having to do things for her. That was her good arm too, because she was paralyzed on one side of her body. And so that was the good arm that got taken away from her. And so when the session opened with the lady saying she was waving her arms, we knew it was validation that it was her that had stepped forward, because she wanted us to know she was okay. She didn't leave that way. And actually, if she had stayed, man, we getting deep. There was talk of amputation.
Wow.
And I was too young to ever hear my grandmother say this, but my mom repeatedly said throughout the years that my grandmother was one that vocalized she never wanted any limbs amputated. And we had reached that point where amputation was very real. And so, yeah.
Well, that's profound, actually. That's pretty profound.
Yeah.
On that same belief, I also, if I can express that, I also believe in angels. I believe in angels protect us. I believe angels guide us, and angels are there for us. When my father-in-law passed in here, he back to whether or not somebody's on the other side, and I realize this is kind of stretching a little to some people, but again, each person's journey is their own, and each person's belief is their own. But in this experience, this is what happened to us. Before David passed away, David started talking, and he was talking to, we were in the other room and we heard him talking. We thought, who's he talking to? And we walked back up to his room, and he was having a conversation with his grandfather and his grandfather's grandmother and his aunt. and they all were passed, and those were his favorite grandparents. And he was having a casual conversation with them, like they were standing right in front of him. He said, "Who are you talking to?" And he said, "Well, I'm talking to so and so, Mac, and so and so and so and so." And like he was looking right at him. He was bedridden, but he was looking right at him.
Yeah.
And it was within a few weeks after that is when he passed. So from even that perspective, I feel that there's the other side, because there are people there waiting for you.
Yeah.
When you come there to help you cross over to that path
Yeah.
and into that area. And to us, that was a positive thing, because it made us feel better. The fact that, okay, if he's talking to them, and they passed a long time ago. If he was talking to them, and he didn't believe, he thought when he passed and when he died, we said, "Where do you think you're going to go, Dad?" He says, "It's nothing but black, dark. There's nothing over there. Nothing."
Right.
Which is weird when I have to laugh about this. David loved scotch. Okay. That was his thing. And we'd get him scotch every year for Christmas. That's also something Debbie wouldn't have known. So now Debbie is living in Canada, but she's English. Okay. So when I say the next statement, you understand a little bit. To validate to Diane, she says, he just wants to let you know that when he got over here, there's no scotch for him here to nip.
That's
and
hilarious.
Diane said, "Nip." And she says, "Well, I'm English. That's this." Tilt. And she's tilting up. Goes, "Oh, yeah."
Yeah.
She said, "He's griping." So she said, she said to him, he's saying to her, to Diane, "So when you get here, which is going to be a long time from now, when you get here, you need to bring me some scotch."
It may disappear on its way there, right? You're like, man, this close. Look.
Yeah, it was almost there. I'm sorry.
Right, man. Yeah, y'all heard me last week with Vanessa Gordon. We actually, the week before last, I took last week off, guys. Let me go ahead and address that because of elections. I didn't want to even deal with the attention spans of everybody else, like looking at it. So I was like, I'm not releasing an episode last week. But the week before that was Halloween weekend. And so I had ghost stories on here with one of my guests.
I heard that.
Yeah. Oh man, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But in it, I talked about, because the conversation of afterlife did come up. I talked about how I like to also validate things with science sometimes, because people oftentimes are conflicted when they're very spiritual. And, but my thing is I have an interest in science. I studied chemistry when I was in college, I minored in it. And so I've always felt like it validates spirituality. And so I always pose the question to people about, the laws of thermodynamics. Even if you just subscribe to science, in it tells you matter and energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transferred. And so we are nothing but matter and energy. So like where do you think it goes, the energy part of that?
Well, I personally believe that the energy is our soul.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the energy is absolutely our soul. I believe in the other side. I've talked to enough people that can validate that for me. That's just my personal opinion, that I feel that there is the other side. I think that we leave this world, there's a holding pattern, so to speak. And during that holding pattern, you kind of get used to the fact that you've passed and that you've gone, so that you can understand what took place. And then from that perspective, that I believe in heaven and hell. I have to be honest, I don't go to church, but I believe in God. I'm more spiritual. My church is right outside this front door, inside this room, in my living room, in the back or on the back patio in the backyard. So I'm religious in that perspective. I think when we transition, that we have the opportunity to move forward, possibly. I won't get into whether or not we reincarnate and move forward in different lives or anything, but I believe that we do transition, and we do transition to a better place or a bad place. And I think that how we live our lives, and whether or not we're good people, and whether or not we have compassion, and humanity, and we treat people like people, and we pay it forward, it makes a difference in how we transition.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think to sum it up perfectly, I agree with you 100% with that. Because it is something that a lot of people just battle with, either understanding it or coming to an acceptance of what they believe in after this, you know.
Well, exactly. That brings me, if I may say this, part of the
Go ahead.
closure that we were talking about. And this was suggested to me by one of the mediums on my program, on the One More Thing Before You Go, Marissa Medden. And it's an episode called Letters from the Other Side. She does writing. So basically, the individuals from the other side write a letter through her to their loved one. Okay. She said they help us get through grief and to help us move forward and us to move on. That if you're still having issues with that, with losing someone, that you need to write it in a letter. Write it to a letter as if they're living down the street and you're going to deliver to them. And then read the letter out loud. Write the letter, read the letter, and then take it out and burn the letter.
Wow.
Don't start any fires anywhere. Put it in the fireplace, put it in a fire pit. Be careful and mindful that you burn the letter.
Yeah.
And what that does is it allows you to get what you want out. If you say it out loud, they're listening. And if you don't believe it, be open to the possibility that maybe they're listening. And if they are, they get your message.
Yeah. Well,
You
you
know, if you,
said earlier about being open and sincere. That is so critical when it comes to like the spirituality side of things, because you can't receive anything when you're closed off and denying even the possibility of it. Because I've connected a lot of ways just by remaining myself to allow myself to be quite open, and it's a rewarding experience because you learn a lot more than what this life can offer you now. And you experience a lot of things that I feel like are unexplainable, and it may make you appear a little weird, but hey, it's a lot of things here that makes us appear weird on a natural
exactly.
scale.
Life's a journey.
Right.
Life is a journey, and you should experience it from many aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't let you leave without talking about your podcast a little bit more, where people can find it, how people can follow you, if you're on social media at all, and just ways where they can really just stay connected to you.
And I appreciate that. My podcast is One More Thing Before You Go. It can be found on just about every platform that's out there, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google Podcast, et cetera, et cetera. It's an engaging and honest conversation about life, what makes us laugh, what makes us cry, how to contemplate. We talk about life. We talk about death. We talk about just about anything in regard to life. Okay. We use alternative health methods for healing. We bring in people to talk about meditation and yoga and alternative health practices to help you live a better life, improve your health, improve your life. I was supposed to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I'm not, because of practicing these things. And you can find me at www.beforeyougopodcast.com, www.beforeyougopodcast.com, one word. I'm on Facebook at Before You Go Podcast. I'm on Instagram at Before You Go Podcast. I'm on Twitter at Before You Go Pod. And you can send me a voicemail if you are interested in being on the show. You can send me a comment or a show note if you want to, just by clicking the link on the website, and you can leave a voicemail.
That's awesome. And if you guys really enjoyed Michael Hurst here today talking about some of the things we've talked about, you're really going to enjoy his podcast. I endorse it 1000%. I always leave each episode feeling 100% better. And so for that, I thank you so much, Michael. You never know who you're reaching and how they even find you. But when they do, something happens, especially if you guys lock in and really just take the time out to listen to some of the things that are shared on there. Man, your health is like remarkable to me. hearing a little bit of your story, even through the podcast. I won't even make you get into all of that because you've been so open already about the things that we talked about. But to anybody who's curious about that, definitely go and follow Michael, check out his podcast, do all of the things he's mentioned, drop him a message, do all of that stuff, guys. But what I hope that you guys leave with today, as we sit in the midst of a pandemic, people are losing people every single day, unexpectedly and expectedly. People are grieving things that they haven't lost in the physical, but just naturally lost emotionally, or even spiritually. So I hope that some part of you can be rekindled after this, restored. Again, remain open, guys, and have a sincere approach in life, and it'll take you a long, long way. Michael, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
I do. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to say thank you very much for allowing me to be on this program and share those stories. I appreciate it. And for everybody out there that's listening, there's always one more thing before you go. There's always one more thing to say before someone's gone. You never know what happens when somebody walks out that door. So don't hesitate. Open your mind, open your heart, say what you want to say, because you may not have that chance. And you want to keep that opportunity open for a positive every day. Tell them you love them, tell them you miss them, tell them you need them. And that's it.
Wow, man. And on that note, I'm gonna leave y'all like I always do. Follow me everywhere at True Talks Podcast. Be blessed in every day that God gives you guys. Your life is full of purpose. Until next time, deuces.